The wind carried dust through the narrow street of the frontier town, stirring tumbleweeds across worn wooden porches. The late sun burned gold against the faded, clapboard buildings, casting long shadows that stretched toward the outskirts of the village. It was the late 1800s, and though the town had sprung up with the promise of progress, trading posts, saloons, a blacksmith, and a church, the air still carried the weight of old grudges and the hard divisions between settlers and the native tribes whose land had been claimed. The people moved about their business, but their eyes held quiet judgment when they passed the boy. He stood barefoot on the edge of the main street, his clothes tattered, his face smeared with the dust of the road. He was no more than 10 or 11, though hardship made him seem older. His dark hair, unkempt and tangled, fell into his eyes as he glanced at the passers-by. Yet it wasn't hunger alone that hollowed out his small frame. It was the way people turned away, the way conversations hushed when he walked too close. No one wanted to admit it aloud, but everyone knew why. He was a half-blood orphan, born of two worlds, but accepted by neither. His mother, a native woman, had died years ago. His father, a drifter of European blood, was buried by the river after a drunken brawl turned fatal. The boy had been left behind, belonging nowhere. The children of the town often taunted him. "You don't belong here," they'd sneer, throwing pebbles or spitting at his feet before running back to their parents' protective gaze. Even the church, which preached mercy, closed its doors when he lingered too long at the steps. He had tried to work, offering to clean stalls or carry buckets for the blacksmith, but each time the answer had been the same: a hard shake of the head, a muttered excuse, a door shut in his face. In a land where everyone relied on someone, the boy had no one. One evening, after another day of searching for scraps, he found himself standing in the middle of the dusty street, his small fists clenched at his sides. His throat burned as he choked back the tears, but his words cracked through the air for anyone willing to hear. "No one wants a half-blood orphan like me." His voice wavered, but he shouted again, louder, defiant, though his body trembled. No one. Most people ignored him, though few glanced his way with pity, others with disdain. To them, he was a reminder of something they wished forgotten: the mixing of blood, the breaking of boundaries they themselves drew between people. And so the boy stood alone, his cry swallowed by the heavy silence of the town, but not everyone walked past. At the far end of the street, a figure had been watching. A man stepped forward, tall and broad, his boots heavy on the dry earth. He wore a dust-worn duster that reached past his knees, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face. His presence carried weight, not from loudness, but from the quiet authority that followed him wherever he went. He was a rancher, known to most in the region, for the land he worked and the cattle he drove across the plains. A man who lived by his own code, sometimes respected, sometimes feared. Unlike others in town, he had little patience for gossip or small-minded cruelty. The boy noticed him approaching and stiffened, half expecting to be scolded, perhaps even driven off. He lifted his chin in stubborn pride, though his eyes glistened. The rancher stopped a few paces away, studying the child in silence. Dust swirled between them, the town buzzing faintly in the distance. The man's gaze softened, though his voice was steady when he finally spoke. "I do." The words were simple, but they cut through the boy's defenses. For a moment he didn't understand. He blinked up at the man, certain he had misheard. But the rancher didn't turn away. He looked down at the boy with the same steadiness he used when breaking wild horses or facing storms on the open range. He saw more than a half-blood orphan. He saw a child who deserved more than the cold indifference of a town that had already judged him. The boy's throat tightened. "You what?" His voice was small, almost lost in the shuffle of boots and wagon wheels further down the street. "I said I do," the rancher repeated. "I'll take you with me." The street seemed to hold its breath. A few onlookers stopped, muttering under their breath. Some shook their heads, others whispered about foolishness. To them, it was strange enough to take in an orphan, but to claim one with native blood was something else entirely. Yet the rancher didn't flinch. His eyes never left the boy's. The boy's heart raced, torn between hope and disbelief. Could it be true? Or was this just another cruel trick, a promise soon to be broken? He wanted to believe, but the world had taught him not to trust too easily. He remembered nights shivering alone by the edge of the river, remembered the way doors closed in his face. No one had ever said those words to him before. No one had ever claimed him. The boy searched the rancher's face for any sign of mockery, but all he found was a quiet resolve. Something about that steadiness pulled him in, even as his mind warned him not to be fooled. His lips parted, but no words came. For the first time in years, silence was not the weight of rejection, but the shock of possibility. The rancher shifted, lowering himself slightly so his eyes were level with the boy's. His voice dropped, carrying not just strength, but something gentler, something the boy had longed for without realizing. Every man deserves a place, and every boy deserves a chance. You can come with me. If you're willing. The boy's chest rose and fell quickly, his hands still clenched at his sides. He wanted to say yes, but fear kept his mouth shut. What if it wasn't real? What if the man grew tired of him and cast him out like everyone else had? The thought twisted in his gut. He shook his head faintly, torn between stepping forward and running away. Behind them, the town seemed to shrink into the background. The chatter, the whispers, even the disapproving stares, all of it blurred. It was only the boy and the man, two souls standing at a crossroads, one offering shelter, the other afraid to reach for it. The boy's lips trembled as he tried to form words, but before he could answer, the rancher extended a rough, calloused hand. It hung there in the dusty air, an invitation waiting to be accepted. The boy's eyes darted from the hand to the man's face, his heart pounding in his ears. His small body ached from hunger, his spirit from loneliness. That hand could mean everything he had ever been denied: family, belonging, a chance to grow beyond the shadows of his birth. But it could also mean risk, heartbreak, another wound he might not survive. He hesitated, caught in that fragile moment between despair and hope. The rancher's hand didn't waver. The boy's breath came short, his chest tight. His world balanced on a decision that could change his life forever. And then, just as the boy began to lift his hand, a voice rang out from the saloon porch, sharp and cutting, shattering the fragile silence between them. You best think twice about that, rancher. That boy ain't worth the trouble. The boy froze, his hand suspended, his heart hammering harder than before. The rancher turned his head slightly toward the voice, but he didn't let his hand fall. Dust swirled in the fading light, the tension coiling tighter in the space between choice and consequence. The boy stood trembling, torn, the weight of the entire town pressing down on that single moment. The answer had not yet been given. The rancher's hand still hung in the air, steady and unshaken, but the boy's gaze flickered toward the saloon porch where the harsh voice had come from. A group of men leaned against the wooden railing, their hats tipped low, faces twisted with disdain. They weren't strangers to the rancher. They were men who thrived on their own small power in town, men who kept their boots polished but their hearts hard. Their laughter rang sharp as spurs in the dry air, but there was no humor in it. It was a warning. The boy's chest tightened. He had grown used to being told he wasn't wanted, but to hear it spoken so openly, in front of someone who had just offered him a hand, made the sting sharper. He looked back at the rancher, half expecting him to withdraw, to let the weight of those words push him into silence like everyone else. The town was always quick to remind him he was less than human in their eyes, a mistake of two worlds colliding. Surely the rancher, strong as he looked, would not stand against the tide of voices ready to drag them both down. But the man did not pull away. His jaw set, his eyes narrowed slightly, and though he didn't speak, his silence was louder than the jeers from the saloon. Still, the boy could not move. His fingers trembled at his side, curled tight against his palm. Every instinct told him to run, to disappear before the promise broke and left him shattered once more. Yet there was something in the way the rancher waited, calm, patient, as if he had already decided and the boy was the only one who needed to. The men at the saloon didn't fall quiet. They spat in the dust, muttered insults, called the rancher a fool for even considering it. "You'll regret it," one of them said, his voice thick with drink and bitterness. "That boy ain't nothing but trouble. same as his blood. Their words carried down the street and others turned to watch, some with curiosity, some with approval. The town fed on such moments, always eager for conflict, always ready to draw lines between who belonged and who did not. The boy swallowed hard, his throat dry. Memories pressed against him the way his father's. Grave had been marked with nothing but a pile of stones because no one wanted to dig deeper. The way his mother's people had looked through him as though he were a shadow, not a child of their own blood. He had no place in either world, and now he feared the rancher's hand would prove only another mirage. His lips parted, but before he could speak, the rancher shifted his weight, his boots grinding into the dust with finality. "You men mind your own," the rancher said, his voice low but carrying enough weight to cut through the noise. He didn't raise it, didn't shout, but there was something in the tone that silenced even the boldest heckler. The saloon doors creaked as a few patrons slipped inside, not wanting to be caught in the storm brewing. Still, not all were cowed. One man spat into the street and sneered. "Suit yourself. Don't say we didn't warn you." The boy's heart pounded, his gaze flicking between the rancher's steady hand and the hostile faces beyond. The choice was still his to make, but it felt heavier now, as if by reaching out he would not only be choosing the rancher, but standing against the entire town. The thought filled him with dread. He was small, hungry, worn thin by years of rejection. How could he bear the weight of more hatred? Yet what else was there? Alone, he would wither. Alone, he was already fading. His fingers twitched. He wanted to reach, wanted to believe, but fear pinned him in place. The rancher didn't press him, didn't move closer, didn't let the hand fall. He simply waited, like a man who had weathered storms before and knew the strength of patience. The boy had never seen anyone look at him that way, not with pity, not with scorn, but with a kind of steady expectation, as if he were worth the waiting. The moment stretched, taut as a pulled rope. The sun dipped lower, staining the sky with amber light. Somewhere a church bell tolled the hour, the sound carrying across the dust-swept town. The rancher's horses shifted at the hitching post nearby, their reins jangling faintly as if even the animals felt the tension. The boy's stomach knotted with hunger and dread, but deeper still was a small spark of longing, fragile and stubborn. It whispered to him that maybe this was the chance he had prayed for on cold nights alone, before the boy could decide. The rancher drew back his hand at last, but not in defeat. He straightened to his full height and looked down at the child with steady eyes. "Think it over," he said quietly. "But no, this I don't make offers I don't mean with that." He tipped his hat slightly, turned, and walked toward his horse. The boy stood frozen, torn between relief and despair. The words lingered in his mind, circling like restless birds. "I don't make offers I don't mean." Could it truly be so? He watched as the rancher untied his horse, swung into the saddle, and rode slowly down the street, the dust rising in his wake. The boy's chest ached. Part of him wanted to run after the man, to shout that he would come, but his legs refused to move. He remained rooted, staring after the figure until he vanished beyond the last row of buildings. The street settled again, the murmur of voices picking up where silence had held them. The saloon men laughed, though quieter now, and shook their heads as if satisfied. Townsfolk returned to their business, wagons rolled, doors creaked shut, yet the boy felt none of it. His world had narrowed to a choice he hadn't made, and a chance that might already be slipping away. That night, he curled in the shadows behind the old livery stable, the only place that gave him cover from the chill wind. He pulled his knees to his chest, his thin shirt no match for the cold. Hunger gnawed at his belly, but worse than that was the heaviness in his chest. He could still see the rancher's hand in the fading light, still hear the steadiness in his voice. No one had ever offered him anything but scraps or scorn, and yet here was a man who had said, "I do." He pressed his face against his knees, torn between the fear of hope and the agony of letting it pass him by. Sleep came fitfully, broken by dreams of voices shouting, of hands pushing him away, of a lone figure waiting at the end of a dusty road. He woke before dawn, his throat dry, his body stiff. The town was quiet, the streets empty. A mist clung low, softening the hard lines of the buildings. For a moment, in that gray light, he allowed himself to imagine what it might be like to ride away from this place. To have a bed, a meal, perhaps even someone who cared whether he lived or died. The thought was almost too much to bear. As the sun crept higher, life stirred again. Wagons clattered, voices rose, and the boy shrank back into the alley shadows. He knew the town would not forgive him for even being offered a place. He had seen the anger in their eyes, the way they bristled at the rancher's words. If he accepted, he would be taking more than a hand. He would be daring to stand against everything the town believed. And yet, what else was left for him? To stay meant only more of the same. Hunger, rejection, the slow fading of a boy no one wanted. The day stretched long. And he wandered restless, always glancing toward the road that led out to the wide plains. He knew the rancher's land was somewhere beyond, though he had never dared venture far enough to see it. Rumors whispered of endless grass, of cattle grazing beneath a sky that never ended. Some said the rancher lived like a king, though others claimed his solitude made him half mad. Whatever the truth, it was a life different from this one. A world beyond the narrow alleys of town and the stairs that cut deeper than hunger. By dusk, the boy found himself once again in the middle of the street where it had all begun. The dust swirled as it had before, and though people moved around him, he felt alone with the memory of the rancher's steady gaze. He whispered the words aloud, barely daring to hear them on his own lips. "I do." His chest tightened. Could it be that simple? Or would reaching for that chance cost him everything? The sound of hoofbeats in the distance made him turn sharply. A rider approached from the west, silhouetted against the sinking sun. The boy's breath caught, his heart leaping and sinking all at once. Was it the rancher returning or someone else entirely? He didn't know, but he couldn't look away. The figure grew closer, the horse's hooves drumming against the earth, the dust rising in their wake. The boy stood rooted in place, waiting, uncertain whether hope or danger was riding toward him. "I do." The sound of his own whisper startled him. The boy's voice was faint, but once the words left his lips, they seemed to echo in his chest. He didn't know if he had spoken them for himself, or if somehow the rancher could still hear. Though the man was long gone down the road, his throat tightened, and he pressed his fists into his sides as if to hold the feeling steady. It wasn't just longing now. It was need, fierce and hungry, the kind that made him feel both brave and afraid at the same time. He knew, deep down, that he could not let the chance slip away. Yet fear shadowed every thought, fear of rejection, fear of more pain, fear of what the town would do if he tried to leave with the rancher. The rider who had appeared on the horizon earlier now came closer. The boy squinted into the lowering light until he could see the man's face beneath the brim of his hat. It wasn't the rancher. It was another figure altogether, a deputy from the sheriff's office. The one who often looked the other way when the townsfolk mocked him. The deputy slowed his horse, his eyes falling on the boy like a hawk's. For a long moment neither spoke. Then, with a snort, the man urged his horse forward, leaving only a cloud of dust. The boy exhaled sharply. It wasn't him, not yet. But the sight reminded him how many eyes in town were watching, waiting, ready to remind him of his place if he dared to step outside it. That night sleep didn't come. He lay awake listening to the restless sounds of the town, the creak of wagon wheels left outside, the muffled voices spilling from the saloon, the bark of a stray dog. Each noise fed his unease, reminding him how fragile his life was here. He thought about the rancher's words, about the men who had jeered, about the way people's eyes had followed him since. He was caught between two choices: to stay where the pain was familiar, or to follow a stranger into the unknown. Risking everything for a chance at something he had never had — belonging. By dawn, the boy's stomach burned with hunger, and his legs carried him without thought toward the outskirts of town. He had no plan, only a pull deep inside that led him to the open road where the rancher had disappeared. He paused where the dirt gave way to the rolling plain, the morning sun painting the grass in gold. He had never stepped beyond the last fence before. The unknown stretched wide and terrifying, but also alive with possibility. For a long time he stood there, the wind tugging at his shirt, until the sound of voices from behind pushed him back into the shadows. A pair of townsfolk, A man and a woman trudged past carrying sacks of flour. Their words drifted through the air, sharp enough for him to catch. "Foolishness," the man muttered. "That rancher will ruin himself bringing a half-blood boy onto his land. Mark my words, nothing good will come of it." The woman clucked her tongue. "The boy won't last. Folks like him never do." Their steps faded, but their words stayed behind, like stones pressing against the boy's ribs. He bit his lip hard to keep from crying out, no matter how far he tried to step. The town's voice clung to him. The rancher himself had troubles of his own, though the boy couldn't know it. On his land, beyond the view of town, cattle grazed under the endless sky, but all was not as peaceful as it seemed. The rancher had enemies, men who saw his independence as a threat, men who wanted his land, his water, his herds. They whispered in saloons, stirring resentment, using every excuse they could find to paint him as reckless. His choice to speak for the boy in front of the whole town had only given them more fuel. Rumors spread quickly, weaving through streets and kitchens. The rancher was soft, distracted, making foolish choices that would weaken him. Those who had always envied him now had their chance to strike. And in the center of it stood the boy. Though he didn't yet know how deeply his fate was being tied to another's. As days passed, the tension in town thickened. The boy felt it each time he stepped into the street, each time a door slammed in his face or whispers chased him down alleys. It was no longer just about him being unwanted. It was about the rancher's defiance of the unspoken order everyone else lived by. If he accepted the offer, it would mean war, not just with words, but with the pride and prejudice of the town itself. The boy understood enough to know that this was not a choice to make lightly. But hunger gnawed at him. Loneliness dug deeper. The thought of the rancher's steady gaze haunted him. One evening, while hiding behind the stable, he overheard a pair of cowhands talking. "He means it, you know," one said, his voice low. "The rancher's not the kind to make empty promises. If that boy shows up at his gate, he'll take him in, sure as the sunrise." The other spat. "Then the whole town will turn on him. And that boy'll be the reason." The boy's heart pounded. The first man's words lit a flicker of hope, but the second's wrapped it in fear. Would the rancher truly keep his word even when the world pressed against him? Or would he regret it as everyone else always had? The boy's conflict deepened when he saw how some of the children of the town watched him. Once they had mocked him openly, but now their laughter carried an edge of fear, as though they knew he might rise above them if the rancher truly took him in. Their parents pulled them closer when he walked by, muttering curses under their breath. It wasn't just about blood anymore, it was about power. To belong to the rancher meant more than food or shelter. It meant defiance, a challenge to the very order of things. Meanwhile, on the ranch, the man who had extended his hand was facing his own storm. Some of his ranch hands had already begun to question him. They didn't say it outright, but he could hear it in their silence. In the way they paused when he gave an order, in the glances they traded when they thought he wasn't looking. He had always commanded loyalty, not because of wealth or charm, but because of his steadiness. Now, that steadiness was being tested. To take in the boy would mean asking his men to share food, shelter, and trust with someone the town had cast out. Some would follow him, others might not. The boy didn't know all of this, but he felt the ripples of it in the way the air shifted around him. His days were filled with watching, waiting, weighing the choice. Nights brought dreams of two worlds colliding, the empty, cold alleys of town and the wide open fields of the ranch. Sometimes he dreamed of the rancher's hand, always steady, never wavering. And sometimes he dreamed of the jeering faces at the saloon, twisted in cruel laughter. The dreams left him restless, his heart pulled in two directions. The conflict reached deeper when whispers of trouble on the ranch made their way back to town. A fence cut, cattle scattered, tracks of riders crossing the land. Some said it was rustlers. Others claimed it was neighbors pushing boundaries. But more than a few pointed their fingers toward the boy, even though he had never set foot on the ranch. "Bad luck follows him," they muttered. "Bring him in, and ruin follows close behind." These words found their way to the boy's ears, heavy as chains. He began to wonder if perhaps the rancher's troubles had already begun simply because of him. The boys. chest ached with the weight of it all. He wanted to believe in the promise, in the chance of belonging, but what if he brought nothing but ruin? What if the rancher's enemies grew stronger, not because of land or cattle, but because of him? The thought gnawed at him worse than hunger. He sat on the edge of the street one night, staring into the dust, whispering to himself, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong anywhere." Yet even as he spoke the words, a part of him clung stubbornly to the memory of that voice saying, "I do." The tension built on both sides of the story within the boy's heart and on the rancher's land. The road between them stretched wide, full of danger, but also full of possibility. And while neither had yet taken the final step toward the other, the clash between hope and doubt grew sharper with each passing day. Both knew, though perhaps only in the quiet of their hearts, that the choice would not wait forever. Something was coming, whether hope, danger, or both. Neither could yet say. But when it arrived, it would change everything. It wasn't just about blood anymore. It was about pride, about the fragile order that held the town together. If one man chose to stand against it, especially a man as respected and feared as the rancher, then cracks would begin to show. And if a half-blood orphan, despised and dismissed by everyone, suddenly found a place at the rancher's table, then what else might be possible? The thought gnawed at the townsfolk like a thorn. Their hostility grew sharper by the day. The boy could feel it in every glance. Shopkeepers refused to sell him scraps. Women drew their children closer. And the sheriff himself gave him a cold warning when their paths crossed. "Don't stir up trouble you can't handle," he said, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. The boy's heart pounded at the threat, but he knew it wasn't just for him, it was for the rancher too. The town would not allow their way of life to be challenged so easily. Meanwhile, the rancher was quiet, almost too quiet. Rumors drifted back to town that his cattle had been driven off in the night, that fences had been cut, that men on horseback had been seen near his creek bed. Some whispered it was rival ranchers, others said it was the town itself sending a message. No one spoke openly, but the boy could sense the unease tightening around every corner. It was as if he carried a storm inside him, and the closer he drew to making a choice, the darker the clouds became. One evening, he stood at the edge of the main street, watching the sun sink low and bathe the land in firelight. The rancher's house lay far beyond the horizon, but he could almost feel its pull, steady and patient, like the man himself. His stomach was empty, his body weary. Yet it wasn't hunger or fatigue that drove him, it was something deeper, belonging. The word itself was dangerous, almost forbidden. Yet it pressed at him with the weight of a destiny he could neither escape nor fully understand. He thought of the rancher's eyes, the quiet strength in his voice, and the words he had spoken. "I don't make offers, I don't mean." The boy wanted to believe, but doubt still clung to him like dust he couldn't shake off. He wondered if the rancher knew how much the town despised him for that one gesture. If he realized how many enemies he had awakened. Perhaps he did. Perhaps he didn't care. That thought filled the boy with both awe and fear. The days dragged on, each one filled with whispers, stares, and the weight of an unspoken choice. He began to notice how some men gathered near the saloon at dusk, their conversations low, their eyes sharp. He couldn't hear their words, but he knew enough to sense danger. Sometimes they glanced at him, sometimes at the road leading out of town. It was as if they were waiting, planning. He lay awake at night, the shadows of their voices crowding his mind, till sleep finally claimed him with dreams of fire and shouting. The tension inside him grew unbearable. Every step he took seemed to echo with a question he could not yet answer. Would he stay and wither, or leave and risk everything? The thought of remaining in town hungry, beaten down, invisible, filled him with despair. But the thought of leaving, of stepping into the unknown where enemies lurked and danger brewed, filled him with dread. It was a choice between two storms, and either one could tear him apart. One morning, while crouched behind the stable, he overheard a heated conversation between the blacksmith and a merchant. "The rancher's brought this on himself," the blacksmith muttered. "Always thought he was too proud. Now he's gone and taken a stand no one asked for. Mark me, it won't end well. The merchant shook his head. It's not pride, it's stubbornness. He sees something in that boy the rest of us don't. But that doesn't mean the town will let him get away with it? Their words burned in the boy's chest. What did the rancher see in him that no one else could? And why was it worth so much trouble? He couldn't answer, but the question refused to leave him. It haunted him as he wandered the alleys, as he watched the horizon, as he felt the eyes of the town prick his skin like needles. The rancher had stirred something larger than either of them, and now the whole town braced for what would come. The boy knew, without fully understanding, that his choice would not just decide his fate, but would decide the rancher's as well. One night, storm rolled in across the plains. The sky cracked with lightning. Thunder shook the ground, and rain came in sheets that soaked him to the bone. He huddled beneath the eaves of the livery, shivering, listening to the storm's fury. And in the chaos, he imagined another storm, the one waiting just beyond the edge of his decision. A storm of men, of pride, of blood and dust. The thought terrified him, but it also sharpened something inside him. He realized there would be no safety in silence, no peace in hiding. One way or another, he would have to step forward when the storm passed. The town smelled of wet earth and smoke from the chimneys. The boy rose stiffly, his clothes clinging to him, and walked the length of the main street. Doors opened, eyes followed, whispers rose like a tide behind him. He felt their weight, their scorn, their anger, but for once he did not shrink. He thought of the rancher's steady hand, the promise in his words. And something within him steadied too. Still, the danger was real. He could feel it growing by the day. Men were restless, their patience thinning, their resentment sharpening into something harder. The rancher's enemies were moving, and soon the town itself would be forced to choose a side. And at the center of it all stood a boy no one wanted, except one man who had dared to say otherwise. That night, he dreamed again not of rejection, not of running, but of standing at the rancher's side as the storm finally broke. He woke with his heart racing, his breath short, and the certainty that the moment was close. Too close. The choice he had been avoiding would not wait much longer. The world around him was tightening like a noose. He could feel the final pull drawing near. The sun rose over the plains. It's golden and relentless, and the boy stood at the edge of the road once more. The rancher's land lay somewhere beyond the horizon, and the town's hatred pressed at his back. Suspense hung thick in the air, every heartbeat carrying him closer to a moment he could not escape. Whatever he chose, the world would never be the same again.